Montana Territory, 1883. The wind cut sharp across the open land as the stagecoach rattled into the small town of Red Willow, its wheels grinding over packed dirt and snow-threaded mud. Inside, Savannah Norwood clutched the baby tighter to her chest, her heart pounding louder than the horse's hooves. Her fingers were raw from the cold, her nerves frayed from weeks on the road, but her eyes tired, yes, held a quiet fire. She had come too far to turn back now. She shifted her shawl just enough to check her daughter's face, making sure the baby's soft breath still misted in the air. "We are almost there, Norah," she whispered. "We made it." The stage jolted to a stop. Outside, a man waited, broad shoulders beneath a worn coat, dusty hat low over storm-gray eyes. He didn't move until the driver called out her name. "Savannah Norwood." She stepped down slowly, one foot at a time, her knees trembling from the long ride and the weight of everything she carried: fear, hope, and the secret bundled in her arms. The cowboy stepped forward. "I'm Prescott Fairland," he said, his voice low, steady. "You must be the one who answered my letter." She nodded, her voice caught. "Yes, I am." His eyes dropped to the small bundle in her arms, his jaw tensed. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "This is Norah," she said plainly. "She's mine. I didn't lie in the letters, I just didn't know how to say it. I could not risk being turned away." Prescott did not speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "You are here now, that is what matters." That was all, no lecture, no anger. Just that strong, steady voice, and for the first time in months, Savannah felt something loosen in her chest. He gestured to his wagon. "Let's get you both out of this cold." As he helped her up, his hand brushed her back, gentle but firm, a shield against the wind, against the world. She did not know why it made her want to cry. The ride to his homestead was quiet. Norah slept against her shoulder, and Savannah stole glances at Prescott when she thought he would not notice. He kept one hand on the reins, the other resting near his rifle. He looked like a man who had seen hard days and found a way to survive them. The house came into view, a sturdy log cabin framed by pines, smoke curling from the chimney. A barn stood a little ways off, and 2 horses grazed in the paddock. It was not grand, but it looked safe. Inside, warmth flooded her cheeks as the fire welcomed them. Prescott set down her trunk, then stepped back, giving her space. "I will sleep in the barn for now," he said. "You and the baby can have the bed." Her throat tightened. "You do not have to, I do," he said simply. "You need rest." "I will bring in water." He left before she could answer. That night, Savannah sat by the fire, Norah nestled in her arms. The baby's cheeks were pink, her small hands curled tight. Savannah kissed her forehead and whispered, "We are safe now." "I think we finally are." She looked around the room, simple but clean. A rifle hung on the wall. A Bible sat on a shelf, and on the table, a plate of dried apples and bread he had set out without a word. It had been nearly a year since she had run. Since Norah's father had died in a brawl back in Kentucky, leaving her with nothing but his debts and a belly full of sorrow. When the landlady had threatened to throw her out, she knew she had to disappear. She found the ad in a newspaper, "Lonely Montana rancher seeks wife." Honest woman only. And something in her stirred. She had not told him about Norah in her letters. She had been too afraid. But now that she was here, he had not turned her away. That alone made her want to believe again. The next morning, Prescott returned from the barn with snow on his shoulders and wood in his arms. "You should eat," he said, nodding to the pot he had set on the stove. "It will be stew by noon." Savannah nodded. "Thank you." Norah reached for him as he passed. Prescott paused, uncertain. Then he reached out one calloused finger and let her grip it. "She likes you," Savannah said softly. "I am not used to babies," he said. "But I do not mind her." Their eyes met. Something quiet passed between them, something new. Over the next days, the snow thickened. Prescott showed her where the feed was kept, how to light the stove, how to split logs safely. He never raised his voice, never pushed. When Norah cried, he offered her a clean cloth or warmed milk. When Savannah dropped a plate from exhaustion, he did not scold, just swept up the pieces and handed her another. One night, after Norah had gone to sleep, Savannah sat at the table and watched Prescott mend a broken stirrup by lamplight. "You are kind," she said, her voice low. "You did not have to be." "I do not think of it as kindness," he said without looking up. "You are here. That means you trusted me. That matters," she swallowed. "I have not trusted many men," he looked up then. "I am not many men," silence stretched, then she smiled just a little. "No. You are not." That night, as she lay in bed with Norah beside her, she heard footsteps outside. The barn door opened, then closed. Wind howled against the walls. But inside the house, she felt warm, safe. Each day, her fear faded a little more. One afternoon, while gathering water from the creek, she slipped on the bank and tumbled hard. Norah, strapped to her chest, wailed in fear. Savannah cried out, her ankle twisting beneath her. She could not move. But then thunder of hooves. Prescott rode up fast, jumped down before the horse had stopped moving. He dropped beside her, eyes scanning her face, her limbs. "You are hurt." I think it is my ankle." His arms were around her in an instant. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, Norah still cradled between them. She clung to him, her face buried in his coat. Back at the house, he laid her on the bed, his hands gentle as he checked her foot. "You will be off it for a few days," he said, tears welled in her eyes. "I am sorry, I should have been more careful." He tipped her chin up. "You are not alone anymore, Savannah. You do not have to do everything by yourself." Something broke open in her chest, not from pain. From the way he said her name, after Norah fell asleep, Savannah sat wrapped in a quilt, watching the snow fall. Prescott sat beside her, shoulders brushing. "My father was a hard man," he said. "He thought weakness was worse than sin. I left home at 17, bought this land with what little I had, worked it alone, lost more than I kept, but I never forgot what it felt like to have no one." She looked at him. "And now," he turned to her. "Now I have you." He did not reach for her, but she reached for him. She laid her head on his shoulder and he let her stay there, the fire crackling low. Outside, the world was cold and hard. But inside this house, something warm had started to grow. The light over the ridge was pale gold when Savannah managed to hobble to the porch, wrapped in Prescott's old coat. Her ankle still ached, but she couldn't stand lying idle any longer. Norah was asleep in the cradle Prescott had carved years back. He'd said little about it, only that it had belonged to someone who never came to fill it. The wind tugged at her hair as she settled into the rocker near the door. Prescott was mending the east fence, his figure outlined against the frost-hardened field. She watched the way he moved, deliberate, steady as if nothing could shake the ground beneath him, but she'd seen otherwise. The night Norah had woken choking on a cough, he'd been at their side before Savannah could even rise. He hadn't hesitated to carry the child outside, letting the cold air clear her lungs while Savannah cried in the doorway, helpless. He hadn't said a word afterward, just tucked Norah back into her swaddling and stoked the fire higher. Now, watching him work, she felt something shift again, something quieter than gratitude, heavier than mere comfort. He noticed her and lifted a hand in greeting. She raised hers in return, then eased herself back into the chair, bones sore but spirit steadier. Later, he came in with splinters in his palm and mud streaked across his sleeves. She was at the basin, soaking a cloth in warm water. "You shouldn't be on that leg," he murmured, setting down the hammer. "And you shouldn't be dragging half the pasture onto your floor," she replied, wringing the cloth and offering it to him. He took it and nodded his thanks. "Fences near done." "Elk got through again. Will they come this close to the house?" "Not if I can help it." He sat at the table, working the cloth over his hands. "Had a year once they came right up to the porch, ate every root I had stored. Lost half my seed potatoes." Savannah leaned against the wall, careful of her ankle. "You grow food too, when the ground gives it. Mostly I raise stock, but a man can't live on meat alone." She hesitated, then said, "I used to help my mother in a kitchen garden." She could coax beans from gravel, or so it seemed. She'd hum while she worked, always out of tune. "I used to think she did it to keep the crows away." He smiled, just faintly, the corners of his mouth softening. "You ever plant since then?" "Not since she passed. The place we stayed after." There wasn't ground worth digging, just brick walls and alley soot. She hadn't meant to say that much. But the silence between them held it gently, not asking for more, not turning away. Prescott set the cloth aside. There's a side patch near the barn, gets good sun. Come spring, we could put in a few rows, if you'd like. She nodded slowly. I would. That night, after Norah had settled, Savannah found Prescott outside, sitting on the overturned trough with a tin cup in hand. The night was clear, stars scattered sharp across the sky. She stepped down carefully, one hand on the rail. He looked up but didn't speak. She joined him, lowering herself beside him with a wince. He handed her the cup without a word. The liquid inside was warm, bitter, and unfamiliar. She sipped anyway. Chicory, she asked. Closest thing to coffee I can manage in winter. They sat in silence, breath rising in clouds. Savannah looked up at the wide sky. I used to think Kentucky skies were the biggest, but out here, it's like the earth just lets go. Prescott leaned back, arms resting on his knees. Nothing holds things down too long out here, not the wind, not the past. She turned her head toward him. Do you think that's true, that the past lets go? He didn't answer right away. Then I think you learn to carry it different. Lighter, maybe. Or you find someone willing to shoulder it with you. She felt it then, the air between them shifting, not from words but from the quiet that sat after them. It was not the silence of strangers anymore. It was something shared. Savannah reached into her shawl and drew out a small piece of folded fabric. She held it out. Prescott took it carefully. A child's bonnet, worn thin in places, the ribbon frayed. It was my sister's, she said. She died before I was born. My mother kept it. Said it reminded her that some things are too precious to forget. He turned it over in his hands, then looked back at her. Thank you, he said, and she knew he meant more than just for the bonnet. They went back inside together. She didn't need his arm to steady her, but she let it rest against her shoulder anyway. In the days that followed, the snow began to melt in soft patches along the southern slope. Savannah took to sitting outside with Norah bundled in her arms, watching the creek swell with runoff. Prescott spent longer hours near the house, mending tools, oiling the saddle, bringing in wood before she even asked. One afternoon, she found him fitting a new latch to the pantry door. The old one had stuck since her arrival, but she hadn't said a word about it. You didn't have to fix that, she said from the threshold. He didn't look up. I know. She stepped inside, Norah asleep against her chest. You always do things without being asked. He set down the screwdriver. You've done plenty without asking too. Like stitching up the patch on my coat when I wasn't looking, she smiled. That tear was driving me mad. They stood there a moment, sun slanting through the window, dust spinning in the light. Prescott spoke again, voice low. I used to dream about what it'd be like, having someone here. Not just to help with chores, but to sit with after the work's done, to know I wasn't the only one listening to the wind at night. Savannah's throat tightened. She stepped closer. You're not alone anymore, she said. Neither of us are. He reached up then, brushing a curl from her temple. His fingers were rough, but his touch was careful. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the space between them closed to nothing, and in that closeness, something sure and quiet bloomed. Norah stirred slightly, and Savannah shifted to soothe her. Prescott's hand lingered a moment longer before falling away. The moment passed. But it had been real. That night before bed, Savannah moved the cradle closer to the hearth. When she turned, she found Prescott standing behind her, holding a folded quilt. I thought maybe you'd want this. My mom made it. Been sitting in the chest too long. She took it gently, fingers tracing the faded stitching. I'd like that, she said. She laid it over Norah's cradle that night, her heart steadier than it had been in months. Outside, the wind was quiet. Inside, something lasting had begun. The thaw came slow and stubborn. By the time the creek ran full and clear, the earth had softened enough to take a shovel, and the scent of wet soil drifted in through the open windows. Savannah stood at the edge of the patch behind the barn, Norah tied snug against her back in a sling. Prescott had marked the rows with twine, and she pressed seeds into the ground with careful fingers: peas, turnip, a few onions she'd coaxed from sprouted bulbs in the root cellar. She didn't hear him approach until his shadow crossed the furrow beside her. "You've got the spacing just right," Prescott said as he crouched to eye the row. Savannah brushed the dirt from her hands. "My mother had a saying, 'Don't rush a seed or a sorrow, both need dark to grow.'" He gave a quiet nod, then took the sack from her hand and began planting the next row. She watched him for a moment, the way he worked without pretense. There was no show in him, just steady presence, like the land itself. She slid to sit on the edge of the garden bed, Norah's warm weight anchoring her as the baby stirred against her back. "Did you ever think of leaving this place?" she asked. Prescott didn't look up. "Once. The winter of '79, lost 3 head in a blizzard and near lost a finger to the frost. Spent a week thinking I'd pack up and head south." "What changed your mind?" He paused, pressing a seed into the dirt. "I saw a fawn break through the snow crust come morning, walked right over the drifts like it had no doubt there'd be grass again. I figured if it could believe in spring, so could I." Savannah looked past him to the trees where the last of the snow clung like lace to the pine boughs. "There's a strength in staying," she said. "There's a different strength in daring to start over." He glanced at her then, eyes steady. "You've done both." She opened her mouth, then closed it. There were things she hadn't told him, not out of deceit, but because the words had felt too fragile to speak aloud. That night, after Norah had gone quiet, Savannah lingered by the fire while Prescott scraped mud from his boots at the door. A gust of wind rattled the shutter and she turned to him. "I want to tell you something." He straightened, waiting. "In Louisville, I scrubbed floors in a boarding house. The woman who ran it kept a ledger of debts. When I couldn't pay, she said I could work off what I owed by cleaning through the night." Prescott stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "She didn't call it punishment," Savannah continued. "She said it was mercy. Said no one else would keep a girl with a bastard child." Prescott's brow furrowed, but he didn't speak. "I left without paying the last week's rent. Took a blanket and 2 biscuits. That was all." She looked up at him, expecting judgment. He came closer, voice quiet. "You did what you had to." "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "Most days I feel like I'm still running." "You stopped," he said. "You came here, that counts." The fire popped and Norah shifted in her cradle. Savannah crossed to her and laid a hand on the baby's back. Prescott watched her, something unreadable in his expression. "I've thought about marrying you," he said suddenly. She turned toward him. "I didn't want to speak it too soon," he went on. "Not before you were ready, but I've thought about it." Savannah's breath caught. "Do you still?" "Yes," she crossed the room slowly. "You'd be taking on more than just me." "I know that." His hand reached for hers, calloused fingers curling carefully around her palm. "I don't have fine words," he added, "but I can offer you a life without fear, a roof that doesn't leak. A fire that doesn't go out." She didn't answer at first. Her throat felt too tight for words. Instead, she stepped forward and laid her head against his chest. He rested his chin atop her hair and they stood like that, the fire dimming low beside them. 3 days later, the pastor came from Roselake, his mare slick with sweat from the ride. Prescott met him at the gate and offered him a drink before leading him in. The ceremony was brief, held in the living room with Norah in Savannah's arms and the scent of fresh bread in the air. Prescott wore a clean shirt and a new pair of suspenders. Savannah had washed her only dress and sewn a ribbon into her hair when the vows were spoken. Prescott didn't hesitate. He looked straight at her, voice firm as he said her name. Savannah's voice trembled once, then steadied. After the pastor left, they stood on the porch together, the sky deepening into blue above them. Norah fussed and Prescott reached out, letting the baby wrap her fingers around his thumb. "I thought I'd feel different standing here," Savannah said. "How do you feel?" She smiled. "Like I've come home." He leaned down and kissed her, not hurried, not unsure. It was the kind of kiss that settled things. Like a door closing soft against the wind. Inside, the fire was lit and the beds were warm. Outside, spring crept quiet and certain across the land. By late April, the river had settled into its banks again, and the cottonwoods along its edges thickened with new green. Savannah stood at the fence line with her arm over the top rail, watching Prescott walk the pasture with a new calf tucked under one arm. The mother trailed behind, lowing softly, her flank damp from birth. Savannah didn't call out. She liked watching him when he didn't know she was looking the quiet surety in the way he moved, the way he gave the animals space without fear or fuss. There was something steady in his rhythm, like the land had taught him patience long before she arrived. Norah, now 8 months, sat in the grass behind her, tugging on Clover and babbling to herself. Savannah had let her crawl earlier that week, just a few feet on a quilt beside the stove. And now the girl strained against every boundary with the kind of determined curiosity Savannah remembered having once, long ago. Prescott climbed the hill toward them and set the calf down near its mother. As he crossed the field, he pulled his gloves off with his teeth, eyes scanning the tree line before settling on Savannah. "She's strong," he said as he reached the fence. "Didn't think she'd stand so soon." Savannah nodded. "That calf's got a will in her." "Like someone else I know," he raised an eyebrow. "You talking about Norah or yourself?" "Both." He chuckled, but his gaze drifted toward the baby, who was now chewing on her own foot with great concentration. "I was thinking," he said, resting his arms on the fence beside her, "we could take a trip into Red Willow next week. Supplies are low, and I need to speak to Hank about the plow blades. You and Norah could come with me." Savannah hesitated. "You sure she'll manage the ride? We'll take the wagon slow. I can rig a cushion for the seat, and you haven't been into town since you arrived." "I don't know if I'm ready." He didn't press, just nodded and looked out over the land. Later that evening, after Norah had been put down and the last of the dishes had dried by the hearth, Savannah found him sorting through nails in the barn. The kerosene lantern cast long shadows, and the air smelled of wood shavings and old hay. She leaned on the doorframe. "I've been thinking about what you said." He didn't turn around. "About town?" "Yes, I want to go." He set down the tin and faced her. "Are you sure?" "I need to stop hiding from what's behind me, and I want to pick up some muslin. Norah's outgrown half her things." "All right," he said. "We'll leave after morning chores." On the day of the trip, they rose early. Prescott hitched the wagon while Savannah packed a small basket with dried fruit and bread. Norah, swaddled in a wool shawl, sat on Savannah's lap as they rumbled out of the yard, the morning sun glinting off the river in the distance. Red Willow came into view as a cluster of rooftops and smoke threads rising against the mountains. The main street was lined with weathered buildings, supply store, livery, blacksmith, and a modest church. A few men tipped their hats as the wagon passed, and 2 women paused outside the mercantile, eyes lingering just a moment on Savannah before turning away. Prescott helped her down and lifted Norah into her arms. He didn't speak about the stairs. Neither did she. Inside the store, Savannah moved slowly through the aisles, fingers grazing bolts of cloth and tins of preserves. Prescott talked to the owner, a rail-thin man with a crooked tie and a bottle of ink-stained hands. Savannah watched him from across the room, how he stood taller when he spoke, how he didn't look to her for permission or reassurance but made space for her all the same. A voice behind her said, "New in town?" She turned to find an older woman with thick gray braids and a polite smile. Her dress was patched but clean, and she held a basket of eggs. "Yes," Savannah said, adjusting Norah on her hip. "We're from the north side." "Near the creek." "Fairland's place," Savannah nodded. "Didn't think he'd ever bring someone in," the woman mused. "That man's been quiet near 15 years. Lost his brother in the war, I heard." Savannah's throat tightened. "He's good to us." The woman gave a small nod. "Then you hold on to him." "Kind like that doesn't come often out here." Savannah didn't know what to say to that, so she just smiled and turned back to the muslin. Back in the wagon, Norah fell asleep against her chest. Prescott glanced over once, then again, longer the second time. "You all right?" "She does better in town than I expected," Savannah said. "But I feel like every eye was on us." He nodded, reins loose in his hands. "They'll get used to you." "What if they don't? They don't have to." "You're not theirs." She looked down at Norah's soft curls, then back at the road. I want to belong somewhere again, not just survive. I don't know if that makes sense. It does. They rode in silence a while longer, the wagon creaking beneath them. Just before turning off the main road, Prescott said, "My brother's name was Ali. He was younger than me, talked more, made friends easy. When he didn't come back, I stopped trying to know people, figured I'd lose them too." Savannah touched his arm. "I'm not going anywhere." He didn't respond, but his fingers curled tighter around the reins. That night, after Norah was down, Savannah found him outside splitting kindling. Moonlight caught on the blade as it rose and fell. "You didn't have to tell me about Ali," she said. He set the axe down and leaned on the chopping block. Didn't feel like a secret anymore. Savannah stepped closer. "You've given Norah more than anyone else ever has. I want you to know that. She's easy to care for, and me," he looked at her, long and steady. "You make it feel like something's waking up that I thought I buried." She reached for his hand, and he let her take it. They didn't speak again that night, but they stood close as the wind moved through the trees. Spring had come, full and certain. And though the past still lived in shadowed corners, the light between them was real. Earned and lasting. The first thunderstorm rolled in just before dusk, low and slow across the flat stretch beyond the pasture. Savannah stood at the doorway with Norah in her arms, watching as the sky darkened and the wind brought the scent of wet sage and distant lightning. Prescott came in from the barn with his hat dripping and his shirt clinging to his back, hair soaked flat to his forehead. He set the latch on the door and turned to her, rain still trailing down his temple. "Roof's holding," he said, pulling off his coat. "Barn's shut. They'll be all right till morning." Savannah nodded, shifting Norah against her shoulder. "She's restless with the air like this. I think she feels the change before it comes." He knelt beside them, rubbing his hands dry with the towel draped over the chair. "My mother used to say storms stirred up old spirits. Might be the wind carries more than rain." Savannah glanced down at Norah, then to him. "Did you believe her?" "I did when I was small. Now I think it's just the land remembering too much at once." The fire cracked behind them, warm and steady. Savannah walked over and laid Norah in her cradle, brushing her thumb across the girl's brow until her eyes fluttered shut. When she turned back, Prescott had moved to the hearth, his gaze low, unreadable. "You've been quieter," she said, settling beside him on the floor, "since the trip to town." He didn't deny it. "When I saw you standing there in that store, with folks watching like they had a right to weigh what they didn't understand, I wanted to tell every one of them that you were mine, that you chose to be here." "You didn't need to say it," she replied. "I already knew." He looked over and his hand reached for hers, fingers brushing hers slow. "I want to make something permanent of this, not just paper and vows, something that stands." Savannah tilted her head. "What are you thinking?" "I've got cedar stacked out back for a lean-to I never built. I'd rather use it for a second room, a space for Norah when she's older, something made with both our hands." She didn't answer right away. She studied his face, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way his voice deepened when he spoke of building. "I'd like that," she said, "but I want to learn the saw myself." "You won't do it alone." The next morning, she tied her hair back with a strip of muslin and rolled up her sleeves. Prescott laid out the frame lines while she held the measuring rod, her movements cautious but sure. They worked without fuss. Norah bundled in a shaded corner with a rattle Prescott had carved from pine and filled with dry beans. By week's end, the frame stood squared and upright, the scent of raw timber sharp in the air. Savannah's palms were blistered, her arms sore, but her smile came easy. "Never thought I'd be proud of a wall," she said as she leaned against the post, breath catching in her throat. "You didn't build a wall," Prescott said. "You built shelter." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch creased with age. "I've been carrying this since before you came, meant to give it when the time felt true." Inside was a silver band, plain but finely made, cool in her hand. "My grandfather's," he said. "He gave it to my grandmother when they cleared land near Bozeman." Said it wasn't worth much except what they made of it. I want you to have it. Savannah looked up at him, the weight of the ring resting in her palm. I didn't think I'd wear a band again. He didn't flinch. You don't have to. She slipped it on. I want to. They didn't speak more that night, didn't need to. They slept with Norah tucked between them in the big bed, the new wall rising just outside the window. Summer settled over the land like a warm breath. The garden pushed up in full, vines curling around stakes, roots deep in the earth. Savannah rose early, tending peas and pulling weeds with Norah beside her in the dirt, hands full of beat tops and laughter. Prescott spent long hours repairing a saddle for a neighbor in exchange for fresh milk and oats, the kind of barter that kept folks alive out here. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Savannah sat on the porch with Norah asleep across her knees. Prescott came up the steps with a tin box in hand. Found this tucked behind the rafters in the loft, he said. Must have been my father's letters, mostly. She looked up. Are you going to read them? He sat down beside her. Thought we could, together. They opened the box slowly, the paper brittle and yellowed, ink faded but legible. The letters spoke of hard winters, of lost crops and quiet grief, but also of small joys, a warm fire, a good meal, a child's first word. Savannah traced the handwriting with her fingertip. He was lonely. Most men were out here. We're not. No, Prescott said. We're not. That night, as fireflies blinked in the tall grass beyond the yard, they sat with the letters between them. Norah sleeping in the cradle Prescott had finally lined with flannel from town. Savannah rested her head on his shoulder. He kissed her forehead, slow and steady. I didn't know love like this could come quiet, she murmured. It comes how it needs to, he said. Years passed without ceremony. The trees grew taller and Norah too. She learned her letters at the kitchen table, her numbers from counting fence posts. Savannah taught her to sew, to knead bread, to spot the signs of a coming rain. Prescott taught her to saddle a horse and how to mend a broken latch with nothing but wire and patience. They built a smokehouse the second summer, added a porch swing the third. Friends came often, their circle widening with time, neighbors bringing preserves, a traveling preacher who stayed 3 nights and helped raise the new roof beam. Savannah and Prescott never left the land. They didn't need to. Everything they'd lost had led them here not to forget, but to begin again. One evening, long after the garden had been put to sleep for the season, Savannah stood in the doorway, watching Norah chase fireflies in the yard, her laughter lifting into the dusk. Prescott came up behind her, wrapped his arm around her waist. She's got your spirit, he said. She's got your steadiness. They stood like that a while, wrapped in the quiet, the land humming low with life. Savannah leaned into him. This is more than I ever thought I'd have, he kissed her, lips warm against her temple. It's what we built together. And it was. Not a rescue, not a refuge, just a life, whole and lasting. The sky was clear that night, the stars sharp above them, and in the cradle of that land, love rested easy and sure.